Let's move ahead and look at the types of machine learning. Now, this is one of the most interesting concepts in machine learning. The three different ways in which machines learn. All right. There is something known as supervised learning, unsupervised learning, and reinforcement learning. So we'll go through this one by one. All right. We'll understand what supervised learning is first, and then we'll look at the other two types. To define supervised learning, it is basically a technique in which we teach or train the machine by using the data which is well labeled. All right. Now, in order to understand supervised learning, let's consider a small example. So, as kids, we all needed guidance to solve math problems, right? A lot of us had trouble solving math problems. So, our teachers always helped us understand what addition is and how it is done. Similarly, you can think of supervised learning as a type of machine learning that involves a guide. All right. The labeled data set is a teacher that will train you to understand the patterns in the data. So, the labeled data set is nothing but the training data set. Now, I'll explain more about this in a while. So to understand supervised learning better, let's look at the figure on the screen. Right here, we are feeding the machine images of Tom and Jerry, and the goal is for the machine to identify and classify the images into two classes. One will contain images of Tom, and the other will contain images of Jerry. Now, the main thing that you need to note in supervised learning is the training data set. The training data set is going to be very well labeled. Now, what do I mean when I say that training data set is labeled? Basically, what we're doing is we're telling the machine, this is how Tom looks and this is how Jerry looks. By doing this, you're training the machine by using label data. So the main thing that you're doing here is you're labeling every input data that you're feeding to the model. So basically, your entire training data set is labeled. All right. Whenever you're giving an image of Tom, there's going to be a label there saying this is Tom. And when you're giving an image of Jerry, you're saying that this is how Jerry looks. All right. So basically, you're guiding the machine and you're telling that, listen, this is how Tom looks, this is how Jerry looks, and now you need to classify them into two different classes. All right. That's how supervised learning works. Apart from that, it's the same old process. After getting the input data, you're going to perform data cleaning. Then there's exploratory data analysis, followed by creating the model by using the machine learning algorithm. And then this is followed by model evaluation and finally your predictions. All right. Now, one more thing to note here is that the output that you get by using supervised learning is also labeled output. Okay. So basically, you'll get two different classes of name Tom and one of name Jerry, and you'll get them labeled. That is how supervised learning works. The most important thing in supervised learning is that you're training the model by using labeled data set, right? Now let's move on and look at unsupervised learning. We look at the same example and understand how unsupervised learning works. So what exactly is unsupervised learning? Now, this involves training by using unlabeled data and allowing the model to act on that information without any guidance. All right. Now, like the name suggests itself, there is no supervision here. It's unsupervised learning. So think of unsupervised learning as a smart kid that learns without any guidance. Okay. In this type of machine learning, the model is not fed with any label data, as in the model has no clue that this is the image of Tom and this is Jerry, right? It figures out patterns and the differences between Tom and Jerry on its own by taking in tons and tons of data. Now, how do you think the machine identifies this as Tom and then finally gives us the output like, yes, this is Tom, this is Jerry? For example, it identifies prominent features of Tom, such as pointy ears, bigger in size, and so on, to understand that this image is of type 1. Similarly, it finds such features in Jerry and knows that this image is of type 2, meaning that the first image is different from the second image, right? So, what the unsupervised learning algorithm or the model does is it'll form two different clusters. It'll form one cluster which are very similar and the other cluster which is very different from the first cluster, right? That's how unsupervised learning works. So the important things that you need to know in unsupervised learning is that you're going to feed the machine unlabeled data, right? The machine has to understand the patterns and discover the output on its own. And finally, the machine will form clusters based on feature similarity. All right. Now let's move on and look at the last type of machine learning, which is reinforcement learning. Reinforcement learning is quite different when compared to supervised and unsupervised learning, right? What exactly is reinforcement learning? It is a part of machine learning where an agent is put in an environment and he learns to behave in this environment by performing certain actions and observing the reward which it gets from those actions. To understand what reinforcement learning is, imagine that you were dropped off at an isolated island. What would you do? Now, panic, yes, of course, initially we'll all panic, but as time passes by, you will learn how to live on the island. You will explore the environment, you will understand the climate conditions, the type of food that grows there, the dangers of the island, and so on. This is exactly how reinforcement learning works. It basically involves an agent, which is you stuck on the island, that is put in an unknown environment, which is the island, where he must learn by observing and performing actions that result in rewards. All right. So reinforcement learning is mainly used in advanced machine learning areas such as self-driving cars and AlphaGo. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of AlphaGo, right? So the logic behind AlphaGo is nothing but reinforcement learning and deep learning. And in reinforcement learning, there's not really any input data given to the agent. All he has to do is he has to explore everything from scratch. All right. It's like a newborn baby with no information about anything. He has to go around exploring the environment and getting rewards and performing some actions which result in either rewards or in some sort of punishment. Okay, so that sums up the types of machine learning. Now before we move ahead, I'd like to discuss the difference between the three types of machine learning just to make the concept clear to you all. So let's start by looking at the definitions of each. In supervised learning, the machine will learn by using the label data. In unsupervised learning, there'll be unlabeled data and the machine has to learn without any supervision. In reinforcement learning, there'll be an agent which interacts with the environment by producing actions and discovers errors or rewards based on his actions. Right? Now, what are the type of problems that can be solved by using supervised, unsupervised, and reinforcement learning? When it comes to supervised learning, the two main types of problems that are solved is regression problems and classification problems. When it comes to unsupervised learning, it is association and clustering problems. When it comes to reinforcement learning, it's reward-based problems. I'll be discussing regression, classification, clustering, and all of this in the upcoming slides, so don't worry if you don't understand this. Now, the type of data which is used in supervised learning is labeled data. In unsupervised learning, it is unlabeled. And in reinforcement learning, we have no predefined data set, right? The agent has to do everything from scratch. Now, the type of training involved in each of these learnings. In supervised learning, there is external supervision, as in there is the labeled data set which acts as a guide for the machine to learn. In unsupervised learning, there's no supervision. Again, in reinforcement learning, there's no supervision at all. Now, what is the approach to solve problems by using supervised, unsupervised, and reinforcement learning? In supervised learning, it is simple. You have to map the labeled input to the known output, right? The machine knows what the output looks like. So you're just labeling the input to the output. In unsupervised learning, you're going to understand the patterns and discover the output. Here you have no clue about what the input is, right? It's not labeled. You just have to understand the patterns and you'll have to form clusters and discover the output. In reinforcement learning, there is no clue at all. You'll have to follow the trial and error method, right? You'll have to go around your environment, you'll have to explore the environment, and you'll have to try some actions. And only once you perform those actions, you'll know that whether this is a reward based action or whether this is a punishment based action, right? So, reinforcement learning is totally based on the concept of trial and error. Okay. Now, popular algorithms under supervised learning include linear regression, logistic regression, support vector machines, k nearest neighbor, naive Bayes, and so on. Under unsupervised learning, we have the famous k-means clustering method, c-means, and all of that. Under reinforcement learning, we have the famous q-learning algorithm, right? I'll be discussing these algorithms in the upcoming slides, right? So let's move on and look at the next topic.